Well, hello there, and welcome to my kitchen table. A place in most homes where we can sit with family and friends and just talk for hours. Let's see where we're off to today. We are off to Hyde, spelt with a Y, and it's a town in Tameside in Greater Manchester in the northwest of England, which has a population of around 34,000 and is right next to Saddleworth Moor, which is a moorland in northwest of England, obviously, reaching more than 1,312 feet or 400 metres above sea level. And it's actually part of the dark area, or the dark peak area, of the Peak District National Park. I've actually spoken about the Peak District National Park on a previous video. Popular place. So, now that you're here, take a seat and I'll tell you a story. Ian Brady was born on January 2nd, 1938 in the Gorbals in Glasgow, in Scotland, and is a notorious British serial killer. Brady is known primarily for his role in a series of murders that took place in Greater Manchester between 1963 and 1965. These were dubbed the Moors Murders, as several victims were buried along the Saddleworth Moor near Oldham in Lancashire. Ian Brady was born at the Rotten Row Maternity Hospital in Glasgow to Margaret or Peggy Stewart, and grew up in the tough slum neighbourhood of the Gorbals. The thing is, the Gorbals apparently was a slum when it was built. That's how bad it was. Peggy Stewart found it difficult bringing up a child on her own and hoped to spare her son the social stigma of his illegitimacy. So she gave up her young Ian to the nearby Sloane family, who adopted him into their own family and raised him as one of their own. Ian's father, his natural father, has never been identified. Early on, Ian showed troubling signs of dysfunctional behaviour and moodiness. When he couldn't get his own way, he would throw violent tantrums, which sometimes ended with him banging his head against the wall. Peggy occasionally came to visit her son and indulged him with gifts. Ian soon figured out for himself who Peggy Stewart really was, and likewise deduced that the Sloanes were not his real family. He was a bright lad. Others in the neighbourhood also caught on to the boy's socially unacceptable origins, and this, coupled with his sullen, unsociable personality and his lack of skill at football, made him unpopular with local children. Ian Sloane, as he was then, came to resent his illegitimacy and began to see himself as a rebellious outsider, not bound by the same rules as others. He developed a fascination with Nazi Germany, Nazi pageantry, Nazi symbolism. He often asked other boys for souvenirs that their fathers had brought back from the war, and when they were playing roughhouse war games, he would insist on being the Nazi or the German. It was at this time that Ian also became known for his perverse and sadistic tendencies, including bullying smaller children and torturing animals in a variety of grotesque ways. By the time he was a teenager, he'd been brought before the juvenile courts for incidents of burglary and housebreaking. On the first two occasions he was given probation, but on the third he was deemed incorrigible, and the court ordered him to leave Glasgow and live with his mother. She'd since moved to Manchester and had married an Irish labourer named Patrick Brady. In 1954, 2 months before his 17th birthday, Ian left the Sloane household and travelled down to join his mother and her new husband. Although he didn't get along with Mr. Brady, Ian took his stepfather's surname and used it for his own. So that's how he became Ian Brady. As a Scot exiled in an English city, Ian Brady's compound feelings of isolation and hostility began to manifest it in other ways. He developed an interest in the writings of the Marquis de Sade and writers of a similar ilk. He became fanatical of a philosophy that championed cruelty and torture, and the idea that superior creatures had the right to control and destroy, if necessary, weaker ones. Brady began drinking heavily and frequenting the cinema, and often found himself in need of extra spending money to support these new habits. He also gambled on horse races. A lot. Brady soon resorted again to thieving, and after being convicted several more times, plus being arrested and fined for an incident of public drunkenness, he was sentenced to 2 years training at a Borstal school, as well as a spell at Strangeways Prison in Manchester. In all honesty, they should have called this time incarcerated as an apprenticeship. They should have. You go into big boys prison, you're gonna learn a lot. So it's like he was going into an apprenticeship. Because while incarcerated, Brady learned illegal techniques for acquiring money and entertained grandiose fantasies of becoming a big-time criminal, pulling off lucrative bank heists and hoping to avoid manual labour and aim to appear respectable, and so studied bookkeeping. His release led to prolonged stretches of unemployment. He worked as a labourer for Boddington's brewery between April and October 1958, before spending a few more months unemployed. Brady eventually found a job in February 1959 as a stock clerk at Millward's merchandising. Almost 2 years later, in January 1961, he met Myra Hindley, who had just been hired at Millward's as a shorthand typist, and who had become the other half of the internationally notorious Moors murderers. For nearly 12 months, however, he remained disinterested and aloof, whereas she liked him enormously. But at the Christmas office party, relaxed by a few bevies, Brady asked Hindley for a date. And so it began. The relationship between Brady and Hindley developed in concert with Brady's increasingly rapid identification with Nazi-era atrocities and his growing sadomasochistic sexual appetite. Hindley was Brady's eager student. Under his influence, she stopped going to church and started hating children. Soon after they became a couple, Brady became fascinated with the idea of rape and murder for sexual gratification. Hindley actively participated in procuring child victims, as well as sexually abusing, torturing and murdering them. Brady was responsible for the murders of 5 children during the 60s. In August 1987, he claimed to police that he had carried out another 5 killings and even said where he had buried the bodies, but the police were never able to prove these claims were true. The 5 murders that Brady admitted carrying out were committed with Hindley as his accomplice. They were the infamous Moors murders, which are still some of the most reviled crimes in Britain, decades after they happened. As a result, Brady and Hindley became 2 of the most hated individuals in British criminal history. On July 12, 1963, the couple claimed their first victim, 16-year-old Pauline Reade, who was enticed into Hindley's minivan while Brady followed behind on his motorbike. They drove up to Saddleworth Moor, where Hindley asked Pauline to help her look for a lost glove. They were busy searching the moors when Brady pounced upon Pauline and raped her. He then smashed her skull in with a shovel and slashed her throat so violently that she was almost decapitated. Brady then buried Pauline's body on the moor, where it remained for over 20 years. On November 23rd, Hindley lured 12-year-old John Kilbride into her car from a marketplace in Ashton-under-Lyne and drove him to Saddleworth Moor. Brady was waiting there and ordered Hindley to wait for him in a nearby village in their hired Ford Anglia, different car. While Hindley waited in her car, Brady attempted to stab the boy with a knife, but the weapon was too blunt. Brady lost his temper and strangled him to death with string before burying his body in a shallow grave. On June 16th, 1964, their third victim was another 12-year-old boy, Keith Bennett, whom they enticed from a street in Chorlton and drove to Saddleworth Moor. Hindley stood and watched from the top of an embankment while Brady sexually assaulted Keith in a ravine before strangling him to death with a piece of string and burying his body. Keith's body has never been found. The fourth victim, 10-year-old Lesley Ann Downey, was lured from a fairground in Ancoats. All these places that I'm mentioning are all around the Greater Manchester area. Brady took 9 obscene photographs of her, showing her naked, bound and gagged, which were later found in a suitcase in a left luggage locker. Hindley recorded the scene of the child's rape and torture by Brady on audio tape. The tape clearly records the voices of Brady, Hindley and the child, who was heard to scream and protest and asked to be allowed to go home and plead for her life. It's believed that she was killed by Brady. The following morning, Brady and Hindley drove Lesley's body to Saddleworth Moor, where it was buried in a shallow grave. On the 6th of October 1965, the couple claimed their 5th victim. This was their final victim, 17-year-old Edward Evans. They enticed him from the Manchester Central Railway Station to their house in Hattersley, where Hindley's 18-year-old brother David Smith was visiting. Brady then crept up on Edward in the kitchen and smashed his head in with an axe. He ordered Smith to help him carry the corpse to an upstairs bedroom and tie it up, ready for disposal. But Smith then ran home and contacted the police. That's how they were caught. Smith explained later that while apparently giving assistance to cleaning up, his sole concern was to escape the house alive. The death penalty, would you believe, had just been abolished just 1 month after Brady and Hindley were arrested. So should they be found guilty, they couldn't be sentenced to death. By the time they went on trial the following April, the punishment for murder was life imprisonment. This meant that the murderer was liable to be detained for the whole of his or her natural life, but could be released on life licence when no longer judged to be a risk. On the 6th of May 1966, Brady was found guilty on 3 counts of murder and sentenced to 3 terms of life imprisonment. Hindley was found guilty of murdering Lesley Ann Downey and Edward Evans and given 2 life sentences. She also received a concurrent 7-year sentence for harbouring Brady in connection with the murder of John Kilbride. The key evidence against the couple included the tape recordings of Downey's made while they photographed her naked, the name of John Kilbride in a notebook, and a photograph of Hindley standing on top of the shallow grave where Kilbride was buried. Brady immediately admitted the murder of Edward Evans, but adamantly insisted that Hindley had no part in it. Brady finally confessed to the murder of Pauline Reade and Keith Bennett in November 1986. Took his time, didn't he? Brady spent 19 years in a mainstream prison before he was declared as having a mental disorder. Are you kidding me? Apparently, he was a psychopath, and it took them 19 years to work that out. Wave a flag for psychiatrists. What in God's name? Anyway, in 1985, he was sent to Ashworth Hospital, which is a secure mental hospital, just in Crosby, just on the outskirts of Liverpool. The trial judge spoke of his doubt that Brady could ever reform, describing him as wicked beyond belief, and effectively giving little hope of ever being released. Successive Home Secretaries have agreed with that decision, while Lord Lane, the former Lord Chief Justice, set a 40-year minimum term in 1982. In 1990, he was told by the Home Secretary then, David Waddington, that both he and Hindley should never be freed. So it was actually changed to a whole life tariff. That's what we call life without parole. In them days, actually, it wasn't so long ago that it changed, actually, only a few years ago. As you can see there, the Home Secretary could make a decision and overrule a judge. They're not allowed to do that anymore. If someone disagrees with a judge, then they go to the Lord Chief Justice. And I don't actually think there's anybody above him. But anyway, so the Home Secretaries aren't actually allowed to butt in anymore. But that, as I say, put both of them in prison for life, meaning life. His successor, Michael Howard, agreed with the judgment in 1994 and told Brady so. In 2001, Brady published a book called The Gates of Janus, or Janus, or Hannes. You see, the letter J has so many different pronunciations, but I think it's the Gates of Janus. In ancient Rome religion and myth, Janus is the god of beginnings, gates, transitions, time, duality, doorways, passages, frames, and endings. That's got the lot covered there, hasn't it? Jesus. Who knew? Come on, hands up. Who knew that? I don't want to read it, so I can't give a review. Sorry about that. The book was published by the underground American publishing firm Feral House. The book, Brady's analysis of serial murder and specific serial killers, sparked outrage when announced in Britain. Despite Brady, Hindley and their murders still providing headlines in the UK tabloid press. In early 2006, various newspapers reported that Brady was hospitalised and doesn't have much longer to live. He was still alive and kicking in Ashworth Hospital. Where's the news? Where's these bloody journalists get their info from? They just believe anything. Brady was actually force-fed since going on hunger strike in September 1999. After the High Court refused him the right to starve himself to death. He begged to be allowed to die. In early 2006, it was reported that a woman tried to smuggle 50 paracetamol tablets to Brady at the prison hospital at Ashworth. The amount would have been sufficient for a successful suicide attempt. Hospital employees foiled the attempt using X-ray screening, which revealed the pills in 2 sweet tubes. I suppose it was like a Smartie tube or something. but they were inside a hollowed out crime novel. Besides the hunger strike, this was just one of his many attempts to kill himself. And he was stopped every time. Winnie Johnson, the mother of Brady's one undiscovered victim, received a letter from Brady at the end of 2005 claiming that he could take police to within 20 yards of her son's body. But the authorities wouldn't allow it. It was reported that Brady had written an autobiography and had given his solicitor instructions that it may only be published after his death. Alan Keatley wrote the book with Brady, titled The Untold Story of the Moors Murderers. Keatley was a long-time visitor and confidant of Brady, and is also known that he was actually his legal heir. You see, now, when you think about this logically, he had nothing when he went inside. Nothing. He wasn't working. He didn't have his own home. He was living with Myra Hindley. So he had nothing. So every penny that he's accumulated has been while he's been in prison. How did he do it? Brady died May 15th, 2017 at Ashworth Hospital, Liverpool. The details emerged at an inquest which also concluded that Brady had died of a form of heart failure caused by bronchopneumonia and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, lung disease. Keatley and Brady's book was first published May 22nd, 2017, exactly 1 week after his death. I haven't read that one either, which is pretty bad form for a person that's telling true crime stories, isn't it, really, when you think about it? Better get my act together. Myra Hindley died November the 15th, 2002 of respiratory failure. And may they both rot in hell. Thank you so much for allowing me to tell you this story, and thank you so much for listening. If you found it interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe. It's free to do, so don't hold back. All right. Just remember, a smile is a facelift in everyone's budget. I've been Sue, TTFN.